Commander Daniel Carter stood before the Galactic Council and felt every eye upon him. Most of those eyes filled with contempt or pity or both. Combined into something worse, the council chamber stretched. High above him with walls of crystalline material that caught and reflected the light from a dozen different suns. Each species present had designed their section to match their home world, and the result was a chaotic mixture of colors and textures that never quite worked together. The human asks us to wait, Councillor Vexthur said from his elevated platform, his triple-jointed arms spreading wide in a gesture of mock confusion. He asks us to maintain Earth's seat on this council despite having no fleet, no military power, no means of defending even their own colonies. Daniel kept his face neutral, even as anger burned in his chest. He had been doing this for years now, and had learned that showing emotion only made things worse with these creatures who viewed humanity as weak and broken. Earth maintains its contributions to the Council, Daniel said, his voice steady and firm. Our research facilities continue to produce advances in medical technology and agricultural development. Our colonies still trade freely with other species. We have not abandoned our responsibilities. A clicking laugh came from the Zephyrini section, where Ambassador Krilthur sat with his insectoid features twisted into something like amusement. Research and farming, he chittered. How very peaceful of you, Commander. How very helpless. Lisa Morgan sat behind Daniel in the human delegation area, and he could feel her presence like an anchor keeping him grounded. She had been his partner in this diplomatic nightmare. For 3 years since the previous ambassador had given up and requested reassignment back to Earth, the other species didn't understand what it meant to lose an entire fleet in one moment. Didn't comprehend the shock that had run through humanity when 847 ships simply vanished from every sensor and communication array simultaneously. Daniel remembered that day with painful clarity, even though 10 years had passed since then. He had been a lieutenant on a supply station near Mars when the alerts started screaming across every channel, and frequency Admiral Kevin Brooks had been commanding the fleet on what was supposed to be a routine patrol along the frontier where human space met the great darkness between spiral arms. The mission was standard procedure, and Brooks had been one of Earth's finest military minds with a career spanning 4 decades. Then the fleet had encountered something at coordinates that now sat empty and lifeless in the void. Every ship had sent automated distress signals lasting exactly 4 seconds before cutting off in perfect unison and leaving behind nothing but silence, no debris field, no energy signatures, no trace that nearly 250,000 human souls had ever existed in that space. Perhaps Earth should consider a protectorate arrangement, Vexthur suggested with false kindness dripping from every word. The Korthian Empire would be willing to assume responsibility for human colonies in exchange for certain resource agreements and territorial concessions. Daniel's jaw tightened because he knew what that meant. The Korthians wanted the mineral-rich asteroid fields that human miners had spent generations developing, and they wanted the agricultural worlds that fed billions of people across a dozen systems Earth declines. Daniel said flatly, "You decline protection?" Vexthur's tone shifted to something harder and more threatening. "Commander, your species has been defenseless for a decade, while others have grown stronger. The galaxy does not pause its evolution because humans lost their toys." Lisa stood and moved to Daniel's side with data tablets in her hands. "We've detected unusual readings at grid reference 773. She said loudly enough for the entire council to hear. "Energy signatures that don't match any known phenomenon. Cosmic background noise." Krilthur dismissed with a wave of his blade-like appendages. "Your human sensors see ghosts because you wish to see your lost fleet returning like heroes from legend." But Daniel saw something flicker across Vexthur's features before the counselor could hide it. Just a moment of uncertainty or perhaps recognition. We are not asking for special treatment, Daniel said, and his voice carried across the chamber. We are simply maintaining our rightful place on this council until our fleet returns. Your fleet is gone, Vexter stated with cold finality. They encountered something beyond their capability and paid the price that all arrogant species eventually pay. Accept this reality, and perhaps we can negotiate terms that allow humanity some measure of dignity in its decline. The other species murmured agreement, and Daniel could feel the weight of their judgment, pressing down on him like a physical force. They had already decided that humanity was finished, and were now just waiting for Earth to accept the inevitable leases. Tablet chimed softly, and she glanced down at the screen before her eyes went wide. She touched Daniel's arm and showed him the readings that were coming through on the emergency channel. That's impossible, Daniel whispered. What is impossible? Vexter demanded, his patience clearly wearing thin before. Daniel could answer every display. Screen in the council chambers suddenly activated, simultaneously showing the same image of empty space at the galactic rim where civilization ended and the void began. Then something appeared in that empty space, not gradually emerging from hyperspace, but simply being there, as if reality had decided to acknowledge its presence. One ship at first, then 10, then hundreds, then thousands. The council chamber fell into shocked silence as the fleet continued to materialize, with ship after ship appearing in precise formation. The sensors counted 847 vessels that matched Earth's original fleet design, but there were more ships. Many more, over 2,000 vessels, hung in space at the edge of known territory, and many of them looked wrong. They had hull configurations that didn't match any species in the Council database, and their energy signatures read like nothing the sensors had encountered. The 4. Incoming transmission. The Council's communication officer announced. A Vaxian who normally maintained perfect composure, but now sounded shaken. The main display shifted to show a human face, aged and scarred, with eyes that had seen things the comfortable Council members couldn't imagine. Admiral Kevin Brooks looked out at the assembled species with an expression that held no warmth or diplomacy or deference. This is Admiral Brooks of the Earth Defense Fleet, he said, and his voice was rough like gravel being ground together. We're coming home. The transmission cut off, leaving just those two words hanging in the air like a promise or a threat. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, something that had been tight and anxious for 10 years, suddenly releasing as hope flooded through him. Vex. Thor stared at the display where the fleet continued its approach toward Council space with perfect formation and clear purpose. Where have they been? The counselor asked, and for the first time, Daniel heard uncertainty in that alien voice. I don't know, Daniel said honestly, but I think we're about to find out. Lisa was already working her communication equipment and trying to establish a direct channel to the fleet. Her hands moved quickly across the controls, while her face showed a mixture of relief and concern. The other council members began speaking among themselves in dozens of languages and dialects. Some sounded afraid, while others expressed anger at this unexpected development. Daniel watched the fleet's approach on the tactical display and noticed details that made his trained military eye narrow with focus. The ships moved with a precision that suggested constant combat drilling, and their formation patterns weren't anything Earth had used before. Whatever had happened to that fleet during their 10 years of silence had changed them fundamentally. He thought about all the species that had encroached on human territory during Earth's weakness. Thought about the Corthians, who had seized 3 colony worlds, and the Zephrani, who had claimed mineral rights in systems humans had discovered. Then he looked at Admiral Brooks's scarred face frozen on the paused transmission and wondered what lessons that man had learned in a decade of absence. The council chamber remained in chaos as species began, demanding explanations and making accusations. But Daniel just smiled quietly to himself. Earth's fleet had returned, and the galaxy was about to learn that silence didn't mean death. It meant preparation. Admiral Kevin Brooks sat in the command chair of his flagship and watched the Galactic Council's station grow larger on the view screen. Beside him, Captain Nicole Price reviewed tactical data while her expression remained carefully neutral. "They don't know whether to welcome us or run," Nicole observed quietly. "They'll do neither." Brooks replied with a voice that had grown harsh from years of shouting orders over weapons fire and hull breaches. "They'll demand answers and threaten consequences until they realize those tactics don't work anymore." Lieutenant Jacob Hayes turned from the communications station with fresh data scrolling across his display. "Sir, we're receiving over 300 hails from different council species. Most are demanding immediate explanations for our absence." "Ignore them," Brooks ordered. "Open a channel to the full council assembly only." The view screen shifted to show the massive council chamber where thousands of representatives from hundreds of species gathered in their various atmospheric sections and seating arrangements. Brooks recognized the layout from his academy days when such diplomatic settings had seemed important. That was before he understood what real importance meant. "This is Admiral Kevin Brooks addressing the Galactic Council." He began without preamble or courtesy. 10 years ago, my fleet departed on patrol and encountered a spatial phenomenon at coordinates 873 Mark 412. We watched the council members shift and whisper among themselves. That phenomenon was a dimensional rift leading to another galaxy entirely. We were pulled through before we could retreat and found ourselves in a region of space under assault by an extragalactic threat. Vexthor leaned forward on his platform. "You expect us to believe that you've been fighting in another galaxy for 10 years? I don't care what you believe," Brooks said flatly, and saw several council members react with shock at the blunt response. "I'm stating facts. The species in that galaxy called the threat the swarm, because individual designation was meaningless for a hive mind that consumed entire star systems." Nicole activated a data stream, and tactical recordings began playing on every screen throughout the council chamber. The footage showed battles beyond anything the comfortable council species had witnessed in their generations of carefully managed territorial disputes. Ships exploded in brilliant flares while swarms of organic craft descended on them like locusts. Entire planets burned as the swarm stripped them of resources and converted the material into more ships and more weapons. "We fought them for 10 years because we had no choice," Brooks continued. "The rift had collapsed behind us, and the only way home was through that threat. We learned their tactics and adapted our own. We salvaged their technology and integrated it into our systems." The recording showed human ships moving with desperate speed and firing weapons that looked nothing like standard Earth armaments. Energy beams cut through swarm vessels, while projectile weapons launched clusters of warheads that detonated in cascading explosions. "You had 800 ships," Krulther said with his insectoid voice carrying skepticism. "Your fleet now numbers over 2,000. We captured and rebuilt swarm vessels," Nicole explained as she took over the presentation. "We also rescued survivors from destroyed civilizations and integrated them into our command structure. The species you see among our fleet are refugees who had nowhere else to go." Jacob brought up personnel records and casualty lists. Of our original 250,000 crew members, only 89,000 survived the full 10 years. We lost people every single day, and there were months where we thought we wouldn't make it through another week. The council chamber had fallen silent as the brutal reality of prolonged total warfare became clear. These species had grown comfortable with diplomatic solutions and economic pressure, but they had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. Brooks stood from his chair and approached the view screen. We sealed the rift 6 months ago after confirming the swarm couldn't follow us through. We've spent the last 6 months making our way back to known space and preparing for what we knew we'd find. And what did you expect to find? Vexter asked. A galaxy that had taken advantage of Earth's absence, Brooks stated coldly. Intelligence reports indicate multiple species have encroached on human territory, seized our colonies, and claimed our resources. Lisa Morgan appeared on a split screen from the Council station. Admiral, I can confirm that 3 human colonies are now under Corthian occupation, and 7 mining operations have been claimed by various species. Using salvage rights legislation, Brooks nodded slowly. I also expect to find a council that assumed humanity was finished and began dividing up what remained of our civilization. That is a serious accusation. Vexter protested, but his tone lacked the earlier confidence. It's a statement of fact, Daniel Carter said from his position in the human delegation. I've spent 10 years watching this council treat Earth as a charity case, while species plotted how to best profit from our weakness. Neckel transmitted another data package, and technical specifications began flooding council databases. These are partial schematics of the technologies we've integrated from our time fighting the swarm. Defensive shielding that can withstand sustained bombardment. Weapon systems capable of penetrating any known armor. And faster-than-light drives that make our previous engines look like children's toys. The Council's military advisors began analyzing the data, and Brooks watched their expressions change from skepticism to shock to fear. You can't seriously believe we'll allow Earth to maintain a technological advantage, Quilter said with clear agitation in his voice. I don't believe anything, Brooks replied. I know that we earned this technology through blood and sacrifice while you sat comfortably in your council chambers. I know that we spent 10 years fighting an enemy that would have consumed this entire galaxy if given the chance. He gestured to Nicole, who brought up more footage showing the final battle at the rift where human ships had formed a wall of steel and fire between the swarm and the portal home. The recording showed ships ramming into enemy vessels when ammunition ran out and crews spacing themselves to make room for wounded allies. Every person on these ships knows what it means to face extinction. Brooks said quietly, we watched civilizations die. We held the hands of friends as they bled out in damaged corridors. We made choices that no one should ever have to make. Jacob transmitted another file containing the names of everyone who had died during the 10-year campaign. 161,000 souls, he said solemnly. Humans and aliens alike who gave everything so that we could come home. The council chamber remained silent as the weight of those deaths settled over the assembled species. What do you want from us? Vexler finally asked. Recognition. Brooks answered immediately. Earth will be treated as a full and equal member of this council with all rights and privileges that entails. Our colonies will be returned immediately, and species that seize them will provide reparations. And if we refuse? Vexler challenged, though his voice lacked conviction. Nicole smiled without humor. Then you'll learn the same lesson the swarm learned. That underestimating humanity is a fatal mistake. Brooks pulled up a tactical display showing the fleet's current position. We're not here to conquer or threaten. We're here to reclaim what's ours and ensure that Earth is never defenseless again. He looked directly at Vexter through the view screen. You have 48 hours to begin colony repatriation procedures. After that, my fleet will handle the matter ourselves. The transmission ended before the council could respond. Nicole turned to Brooks. That might have been too aggressive. They respect strength, Brooks said tiredly. 10 years ago, we tried diplomacy and courtesy. Look where that got us. Jacob checked his sensors. Admiral, we're picking up fleet movements from multiple species. Looks like they're mobilizing in response to our presence. Brooks settled back into his command chair. Let them mobilize. Let them plan and strategize and convince themselves they can match us. Nicole understood immediately. You want them to try. I want them to understand, Brooks corrected. Understanding requires demonstration. The flagship's engines hummed with power that came from technology the Council couldn't imagine and had never needed to develop. Brooks thought about the coming confrontation and felt no satisfaction or eagerness, just grim certainty that some lessons could only be learned through harsh experience. The fleet that had departed Earth 10 years ago seeking peaceful exploration had returned as hardened warriors who knew the true price of survival. Now the galaxy would learn that price too. The Earth Defense Fleet entered orbit around humanity's home world, and Dr. Helen Grant watched through the medical bay viewport as the blue marble grew larger against the black void. She had left Earth as a bright young medical officer, full of optimism, and was returning as something else entirely. Feels strange, doesn't it? Captain Raymond Cole asked from beside her. The ground forces commander still wore his combat armor, even though the battles were supposedly over. Everything feels strange now, Helen replied while checking the medical reports on her tablet. We're bringing home 89,000 people who aren't the same ones who left. Raymond nodded slowly. My Marines sleep with weapons within arm's reach and wake up at every unexpected sound. They can't turn off the combat reflexes, even though we've told them they're safe. Helen pulled up psychological evaluation data that made her chest tighten with concern. 73% show symptoms of severe combat stress. 41% have nightmares at least 5 times per week. And almost everyone reports difficulty connecting with civilians. The fleet had been sending advanced data to Earth's medical and military facilities for weeks now, preparing them for what was coming home. But Helen knew that no amount of preparation could truly ready people for the reality. She remembered the first battle against the swarm with painful clarity, even though she wished she could forget. Remembered running through corridors slick with blood while carrying wounded crew members toward overwhelmed medical bays. Her training had taught her to save lives through careful procedure and established protocols. The war had taught her to make impossible choices about who lived and who died when resources ran out. Admiral Brooks wants all department heads in the main briefing room, Raymond said while checking his communication device. Earth's leadership is requesting detailed reports on our capabilities and experiences. They made their way through the flagship's corridors, passing crew members who moved with the efficient, purposeful stride of combat veterans. Every person they passed showed signs of the 10-year campaign and scars or mechanical augmentations, or eyes that had seen too much. The briefing room held the senior staff, along with holographic representations of Earth's government officials and military commanders. Admiral Brooks stood at the head of the table, looking older than his 63 years. Welcome home, President Martinez said from the holographic display. A woman in her 50s who had been vice president when the fleet departed and had assumed office 3 years ago. Thank you, Madam President. Brooks replied formally. We've reviewed your preliminary reports, Martinez continued. And frankly, the scope of what you've described is almost incomprehensible. An entire galaxy under siege by an extragalactic hive mind. Nicole Price activated the main display, showing tactical maps of the other galaxy. The swarm had already consumed 60% of that galaxy when we arrived. They moved from system to system like locusts, stripping every planet of resources and converting the material into more ships. How did you survive against such overwhelming odds? Asked General Patterson from Earth's Defense Command. Raymond stood to answer. We stopped fighting like we were trained and started fighting to win. Every battle became a lesson in what worked and what got people killed. He brought up combat footage showing tactics that made the Earth military officers visibly uncomfortable. Human ships using destroyed vessels as shields and luring swarm craft into trap formations where coordinated fire could destroy dozens at once. We learned to think like the swarm, Raymond explained. To predict their patterns and exploit their weaknesses. They were a hive mind, which meant they were predictable once you understood their decision-making process. Helen activated her medical section of the report. We also had to adapt our medical procedures. Conventional treatment protocols assumed access to proper facilities and steady supply lines. She showed images of field surgery performed in damaged sections with makeshift equipment. We lost a lot of people before we figured out how to keep them alive long enough to reach proper medical care. A holographic figure materialized showing a reptilian alien standing nearly 7 feet tall with scales that shifted between green and blue. This is Zucknar, Brooks introduced, one of our alien allies who will testify to what we experienced. Zucknar bowed his head respectfully. My world was called Dekva, and it was beautiful until the swarm came. They descended on our planet like a plague, and within days our civilization was burning. His voice carried weight and pain. I was a warrior scholar when the humans found me, and 12 other survivors hiding in bunker ruins. They brought us aboard their ships, even though they had barely enough resources for their own people. Why had you taken refugees when you were already struggling? Martinez asked Brooks. Because it was the right thing to do, Brooks answered simply. We couldn't save everyone, but we saved who we could, Zucknar continued. The humans taught us their tactics and gave us purpose again. I watched them fight with a ferocity that my people's legends could not match. They never surrendered and never stopped looking for ways to win. He gestured to the tactical displays. When conventional weapons failed, they invented new ones. When their ships were damaged, they rebuilt them better. When facing impossible odds, they found ways to make the impossible merely difficult. Ambassador Lisa Morgan appeared on the communication screen from the council station. Admiral, I'm getting reports that several species are mobilizing military forces. The Corthians in particular are refusing to discuss colony repatriation. Brooks's expression hardened. Then we'll move to Phase 2 of the return schedule. What's Phase 2? President Martinez asked with concern. Reclamation, Raymond answered. We're taking back what's ours by force, if necessary. The Earth officials looked uncomfortable, and General Patterson spoke up. Admiral, I understand your frustration, but we can't just attack Council species. The diplomatic consequences would be severe. Nicole leaned forward. General, with respect. We spent 10 years fighting for survival while the Council species you're worried about offended. Carved up human territory like vultures. They don't respect diplomacy because they've never faced real consequences. Helen added her perspective. I've treated wounded from battles where the swarm outnumbered us 1,000 to 1. I've watched crew members sacrifice themselves so their friends could live another day. And I've seen what happens when you show mercy to an enemy that views it as weakness. She looked directly at Martinez. These people came home expecting Earth to stand with them after everything they sacrificed. If we tell them to back down and accept more diplomatic delays, they'll lose faith in the very government they fought to protect. The room fell quiet as the weight of that statement settled over everyone. Brooks finally spoke. Madam President, I'm not asking for permission to start a war. I'm informing you that my fleet will be recovering our colonies within the week. You can support us publicly or distance yourself politically, but the outcome won't change. Martinez studied Brooks for a long moment before responding. 10 years ago, I would have called that insubordination. 10 years ago, I would have accepted that judgment. Brooks replied. But I buried too many good people to waste time on political posturing. President Martinez seemed to make a decision. General Patterson, coordinate with Admiral Brooks's staff on the colony recovery operations. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. Patterson looked surprised but nodded. Yes, Madam President. Lisa's image flickered as new data came through. Admiral, intelligence just intercepted communication between the Corthian military command. They're assembling a fleet to defend the occupied colonies. How many ships? Nicole asked, Approximately 900 vessels, Lisa answered. Raymond checked his tactical board. We could take them with a quarter of our fleet. Brooks considered the options while everyone waited. We'll use half our fleet. I want overwhelming force that makes continued resistance obviously futile. He stood and addressed the entire room. Understand something, we didn't spend 10 years becoming better killers just to come home and resume business as usual. We learned that the galaxy respects strength and punishes weakness. Helen watched the Earth officials process this harsh reality and saw understanding begin to dawn on their faces. The Galactic Council operates on carefully maintained balance where no one species becomes too powerful. Brooks continued. That system worked when threats were manageable and conflicts stayed limited. He activated footage of the swarm, consuming a populated world. But that system fails completely when faced with existential threats. We saw entire civilizations die because they relied on diplomacy and treaties instead of having the strength to defend themselves. Zekener spoke again. My people tried negotiating with the swarm. TRIED offering resources and territory in exchange for peace. The swarm consumed our negotiators and used the biological material to create more soldiers. The alien scales darkened with emotion. Humans didn't try to negotiate or appease. They fought, and when fighting didn't work, they fought smarter. They earned my loyalty through action, not promises. Martinez looked at the assembled officers and aliens before speaking. It seems Earth needs to adjust to a new reality just as much as the Council does. Yes, Madam President, Brooks agreed. The fleet that left was exploratory and defensive. The fleet that returned is... War Prince Tholkar of the Korthian Empire watched his fleet assemble in orbit above the human colony world of New Dakota and felt confident in his numerical superiority. 900 ships against whatever ragtag force Earth could muster seemed like favorable odds. The humans are approaching, his sensor officer reported. Reading 1,000 vessels on intercept course. Tholkar's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Exactly as intelligence predicted. They're committing half their fleet to this engagement, which leaves their other positions vulnerable. His second-in-command, Velmoth, brought up tactical projections. Our analysis indicates human weapons are outdated by at least 2 decades. Their shielding technology is inferior to our latest military-grade systems. Begin deployment into attack formation Gamma, Tholkar ordered. We'll demonstrate to these primitives that 10 years of absence has left them hopelessly behind the modern galactic powers. The Korthian fleet spread into a wall formation designed to maximize overlapping fire arcs. It was a standard tactic that had proven effective in countless territorial disputes over the past century. Admiral Brooks watched the Korthian deployment on his tactical display and resisted the urge to smile. They're using textbook formation patterns, he observed to Nicole, who stood beside him. Should we inform them that our textbooks got updated? Nicole asked dryly. Let them learn through experience, Brooks replied. Sophie, are your fighter wings ready? Lieutenant Sophie Turner checked in from the flight deck where 300 small craft waited for launch. All squadrons prepped and ready, Admiral. Pilots are eager to show these Korthians what real combat looks like. The distance between fleets closed steadily, and Tholkar studied the human formation with growing confusion. Their ships weren't arranged in any recognizable pattern and seemed almost scattered compared to Korthian military precision. They have no discipline, Velmoth commented. This will be over quickly. All ships prepare to fire, Tholkar commanded. Target their largest vessels first. The Korthian fleet opened fire with energy weapons that have been devastating in previous conflicts. Beams of concentrated power lanced across space toward the human ships. Then something unexpected happened. The human shields didn't just absorb the attacks, they seemed to drink them in like water disappearing into sand. The Korthian weapons struck the defensive barriers and simply stopped having any effect. Increased power to weapons. Thulkar ordered with the first hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice. The Korthian ships channeled more energy into their weapon systems and fired again with twice the intensity. The results were identical as human shields continued to resist without visible strain. Their defensive technology doesn't match anything in our databases, the sensor officer said while frantically checking readings. Brooks nodded to Nicole, who activated the fleet's offensive systems. Target their shield generators with penetrator rounds. Then follow up with beam weapons. The human ships fired, and Thulkar watched in horror as projectiles punched straight through Korthian shields as if they weren't there. The rounds struck critical systems with precision that suggested perfect targeting data. Then energy beams followed through the holes created by the projectiles, and Korthian ships began exploding in brilliant flares of light, evasive maneuvers. Thulkar shouted, but his fleet's formation was too rigid and too predictable. Sophie launched her fighter squadrons, and they poured from the human carriers like angry insects. But these weren't the lumbering attack craft the Korthians expected. These fighters moved with incredible speed and agility. "They're using swarm tactics," Velmoth said with confusion evident in his tone. "Individual ships are coordinating as if they share one mind." Sophie led her wing through the Korthian formation while her pilots moved in perfect synchronization. They had learned these tactics fighting an actual hive mind, and now applied those lessons against opponents who had never faced such coordination. The fighters targeted weapon systems and engine clusters with surgical precision, crippling Korthian ships without destroying them completely because Brooks had ordered minimum necessary force. "This is impossible," Thulkar said, while watching his fleet being dismantled. "Our intelligence said humans were using pre-war technology." "Your intelligence was wrong," came a transmission from Brooks directly. "War Prince Thulkar, you're attacking a fleet that spent 10 years fighting for survival against an enemy that makes your empire look like children playing soldier." Nicole brought up tactical footage from the war against the swarm and forced it onto every Korthian ship's display. The recordings show battles where human vessels faced odds that made the current engagement look insignificant. Thulkar watched humans fighting against thousands of enemy craft while protecting refugee ships and maintaining defensive formations despite overwhelming fire. He saw tactics born from desperation and refined through constant warfare. "We fought something that wanted to consume the entire universe," Brooks continued. "Your territorial ambitions and political maneuvering are nothing compared to genuine existential warfare." Raymond Cole had deployed marine assault shuttles that were now boarding crippled Korthian vessels. The ground forces moved through the ships with practiced efficiency and secured key areas before the defenders could mount organized resistance. "Your Marines are occupying my ships," Thulkar protested. "This is a violation of warfare protocols. Your occupation of human colonies was a violation of basic decency," Raymond replied over the tactical channel. "Consider this education in consequences." The Korthian fleet attempted to retreat, but human ships had already moved to block escape routes. Sophie's fighters herded enemy vessels like sheepdogs controlling prey animals. "You have two options," Brooks stated flatly. "Surrender now and face tribunal for illegal occupation, or continue fighting and we'll show you what total warfare actually means." Thulkar looked at his tactical board, where over 300 of his ships were already disabled or destroyed. The battle had lasted less than 20 minutes, and his supposedly superior fleet was being humiliated. "How did you acquire such technology?" he demanded. "We earned it," Nicole answered. "Through blood and sacrifice and 10 years of learning how to survive when extinction was the alternative." Helen Grant was already preparing medical teams for both human and Korthian casualties. She had argued against the aggressive approach, but understood the necessity of demonstrating Earth's new capabilities. The Human fleet's medical bays were treating wounded Korthian soldiers with the same care given to their own people. Helen made sure every patient received proper treatment regardless of their species or allegiance. "Why are you helping our wounded?" a captured Korthian medical officer asked while watching Helen work. "Because they're wounded," Helen answered simply. "We don't punish soldiers for following orders. We hold leaders accountable for giving immoral commands." Tholkar received reports of human medical treatment and felt confused by the contradiction. These warriors fought with ruthless efficiency, but showed mercy to defeated enemies. "I surrender," he finally transmitted. "The Korthian fleet yields to Earth's forces." Brooks accepted the surrender and immediately ordered his ships to cease fire. All Korthian vessels will power down weapons and await boarding teams. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun, leaving the Korthian fleet broken and the human colony liberated. Commander Daniel Carter watched the engagement from the Galactic Council station, where every species' military analysts had been monitoring the combat. The silence in the observation chamber spoke volumes about their shock. "Did you know they were capable of this?" Vexter asked quietly. "I knew they survived 10 years against impossible odds," Daniel answered. "I didn't know exactly what that survival had cost or taught them." Lisa Morgan pulled up casualty reports showing minimal human losses compared to extensive Korthian damage. They disabled over 400 ships without destroying most of them. That kind of precision requires incredible skill and restraint. Vexter studied the tactical recordings with the eye of someone who had commanded fleets in his youth. Those fighter tactics are unlike anything in our military databases. The coordination suggests training against opponents who fight as unified consciousness. "They fought the swarm," Daniel said, "a hive mind that consumed galaxies." The council chamber erupted in urgent discussions as species realized that humanity's return had fundamentally changed the galactic power balance. Brooks transmitted directly to the council. "The Korthian fleet has surrendered, and all occupied human colonies are being liberated. War Prince Tholkar and his command staff will face tribunal for war crimes related to the occupation." He paused to let that sink in before continuing. "Any species currently occupying human territory has 48 hours to withdraw peacefully. After that, my fleet will handle the situation the same way we handled the Korthians." The transmission ended and Daniel watched various species begin hasty communications with their home governments. "They're terrified," Lisa observed. "Good," Daniel replied. "Fear breeds respect when diplomacy has failed." Brooks sat back in his command chair and felt the weight of command settle over him like a familiar burden. The battle had gone exactly as planned, with minimal casualties and maximum demonstration of capability. "Think they'll test us again?" Nicole asked. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so full, with every species sending their highest-ranking representatives to witness what many were calling the most important session in Council history. Admiral Brooks stood before them wearing his dress uniform, which bore medals from battles. The Council species couldn't imagine High Counselor Vexter called the session to order with visible reluctance. The Council convenes to address Earth's recent military actions and determine appropriate response to their aggressive reclamation of territory. "Aggressive?" Ambassador Lisa Morgan said from the human delegation area. "Earth recovered colonies that were illegally occupied during our defenseless period. If the Council considers defending our own territory aggressive, then perhaps the Council needs to reconsider what constitutes legitimate governance." Several species murmured agreement while others shifted uncomfortably, because Lisa's point was difficult to refute. The occupation of human colonies had violated Council protocols, even if no one had enforced those rules. Commander Daniel Carter activated displays showing documented evidence of systematic exploitation. During Earth's 10-year absence, 17 different species seized control of human assets. The Korthians occupied 3 colony worlds. The Zephyrini claimed mineral rights in 12 systems, and various others helped themselves to research stations and trade outposts. Those actions were justified under salvage and abandonment laws. Quilthur protested with his insectoid features twisted in defensive posture. Abandonment requires formal declaration. Lisa countered, Earth never surrendered claim to its territory. Our fleet was missing, not dissolved. Captain Nicole Price stood beside Brooks and projected combat footage from the engagement with the Corthian fleet. Your species took advantage of what you assumed was permanent weakness. Now you're discovering that assumption was catastrophically wrong. The recording showed the battle's one-sided nature and the technological superiority human forces demonstrated. Council military advisors had already analyzed the combat data, and their reports uniformly concluded that no single Council species could match Earth's current capabilities. You cannot expect us to simply accept this new balance of power, Vexter said, though his tone lacked its usual authority. Earth has returned with technologies that upset centuries of carefully maintained equilibrium. Brooks stepped forward. The equilibrium you're defending is one where strong species dominate weak ones through careful political manipulation. It's a system that works fine until you face threats that don't care about your protocols. He activated holographic displays showing the war against the swarm with images that made several species representatives visibly recoil. This is what real warfare looks like when you're fighting for survival rather than territorial advantage. Dr. Helen Grant appeared on screen from the fleet's medical facilities. I've created memorial gardens aboard our flagship, honoring 161,000 souls who died fighting the swarm. Those deaths include humans and 17 different alien species who joined our cause. She pulled up individual stories and faces. Lieutenant Marcus Webb died holding a corridor so his squad could evacuate wounded. Engineer Patricia Lane kept life support running for 18 hours straight while her ship burned around her. Zeeknar's brother Dekmal gave his life defending a human medical bay from swarm boarders. The council chamber fell silent as the human cost became personal rather than statistical, Captain. Raymond Cole transmitted from New Dakota, where reconstruction efforts were already underway. We're not here to conquer or subjugate. We're here to ensure Earth never faces exploitation again and to offer genuine partnership to species willing to meet us as equals. Partnership built on military superiority? Quilthur asked with clear skepticism. Partnership built on mutual respect, Raymond corrected. Something this council has failed to demonstrate toward humanity. Deaconar appeared alongside other alien survivors who had integrated into the human fleet. The reptilian warrior addressed the council in their shared trade language. My people are extinct because we relied on council protection that never came. We trusted in diplomacy while the swarm consumed our worlds. His scales darkened with emotion. The humans found us when we had nothing left and gave us purpose again. They didn't recruit us as servants or inferiors, but as comrades who had suffered similar losses. Another alien stepped forward. A delicate crystalline being named Lyra, whose species have been renowned for their artistic achievements. The swarm valued my people's unique biology for incorporation into their hive structure. The humans valued us for our culture and gave us shelter when no one else would. She gestured toward the human delegation. These warriors who fight with such ferocity also create memorial gardens and preserve the stories of those who fell. They understand that strength without compassion is merely brutality. Brooks let the testimony sink in before speaking again. Earth is proposing a fundamental restructuring of how this council operates. We're offering to share our defensive technologies and tactical knowledge with species willing to commit to genuine mutual defense, and those who refuse, Vexter asked, will be left to their own devices, Nicole answered. We won't force participation, but we also won't extend protection to those who choose isolation. Lisa transmitted detailed proposals showing alliance structures based on shared responsibility rather than hierarchical control. Every species contributes according to their capabilities. Research is shared freely among members. And military coordination follows merit-based command rather than political favoritism. The council members began arguing among themselves with some seeing opportunity. While others clung to traditional power structures, Daniel stood and his voice cut through the chaos. For 10 years I defended Earth's council seat while you mocked our weakness and planned how to divide our territory. I watched species who claimed to value justice and cooperation act like vultures, circling wounded prey. He looked directly at Vexter. The Admiral is offering you a chance to build something better than the comfortable corruption you've maintained. You can join us in creating real security. Or you can continue your political games until something worse than the swarm finds this galaxy. Helen transmitted medical data showing how human-developed treatments had saved lives from multiple species. We've already begun sharing our advanced medical technology freely because healing doesn't require political negotiation. She pulled up examples of Corthian soldiers receiving treatment for injuries sustained in the recent battle. These warriors tried to kill us yesterday, but today we're ensuring they survive to return home. That's not weakness, it's strength applied with wisdom. Brooks walked closer to the council's central platform. I've seen what happens when civilizations wait too long to prepare for real threats. I've watched entire species disappear because they believed their diplomatic agreements would protect them from existential dangers. He gestured to the footage still playing on various displays. The swarm didn't negotiate or respect territorial boundaries. It consumed everything in its path until we learned how to stop it. And you believe similar threats exist? Vexter asked with genuine concern creeping into his voice. I know they do, Brooks stated flatly. The universe is vast and we've barely explored a fraction of it. Assuming the swarm was unique is the kind of complacency that gets civilizations killed. Raymond transmitted tactical assessments showing defensive strategies for various threat scenarios. We're not asking you to become warriors overnight. We're asking you to acknowledge that peace requires the ability to defend it. Krilthor clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The Zephrony Collective wishes to join this alliance. We recognize that our previous actions toward human territory were wrong and seek to make appropriate restitution. Several other species quickly followed suit with declarations of interest, while others remained silent and wary. Vexter looked at the shifting political landscape and understood that the old order was dying whether he accepted it or not. The Council recognizes Earth's right to reclaim all illegally occupied territory and acknowledges that human military advancement was earned through legitimate combat experience. He paused before continuing. High Council proposes a 6-month transition period during which interested species can negotiate terms for this new alliance structure. Brooks nodded acceptance. Earth agrees to the transition period, but maintains that our colonies must be returned immediately. Reparations can be negotiated over time. Lisa began coordinating with species representatives who wanted to join the alliance while Daniel fielded questions about specific treaty terms, returned to her medical duties, knowing that healing the galaxy's wounds would take longer than healing physical injuries, but feeling hopeful that progress was possible. Raymond started planning joint training exercises for allied species who wanted to learn human combat tactics. Nicole worked with Earth's government to establish military coordination structures that could handle multi-species cooperations. Ekinar and the other survivors began planning memorial ceremonies to honor all those who fell fighting the swarm. The council session continued for hours as centuries of established order began transforming into something new. Brooks watched it all unfold with mixed feelings because he understood the cost of the change they were implementing.